and share with me your thoughts about the 5% Club. How does it resonate? And how do you see this fitting into the scope of what's out there in kind of the college athlete community?
As a former student athlete, Rob, you have this experience that's for some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now I think 6 years, right? Depending on, red shirts and this, that, and the other. And the experience comes and goes. But you have this experience in which you're part of a team, you're a part of a community, the other teams you're friends with, right? It's this big group. And then you go out into the working world and it's poof, gone, right? So you're empty trying to find that again. And if you don't have that in the workplace, which it's not always attainable depending on what you do, how old the people are that you work with, the place that you're going to live and for the job or whatever the case is. So how do you stay in touch with people? How do you connect with others that are like-minded that didn't go to your school? Because here's the thing. You had teammates that, yeah, look, you're going to keep in touch with some of them. You're never going to talk to others. That's okay. But you all went through a similar experience. And so how do you find people in the community in which you moved to, or maybe you're from, you go back to, whatever the case is, that you have shared interests with? Most people who are former student athletes have a similar mindset. They have similar called outdoor activity interests or other sports hobbies or things that you can get involved in, right? That you create your own, not only social group, maybe there's a networking component from a job perspective. You kind of never know, right? But I think you're always seeking that out because as a student athlete, everything's done for you, right? You're part of the team. Okay, you're part of this group. Once you get into the working world, like no one's got a group for you. And that's, I think what you've done with 5% Club is fantastic in trying to create that club, create that group for people. And it's not an exclusive thing, right? Like yes, it's exclusive in the sense that you had to be a former student athlete, but as we've talked about, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, right? And so, you never know where they come from. And as you think about your story that you're telling people along the way, eventually that student athlete experience gets moved to the bottom, right? It's, hey, I was here and then I was here and now I'm here. And you're talking about the different jobs that you've been at probably, or the different places. And it's like when you go to college, you don't really talk about the high school you went to, right? Like things keep moving down the resume. So people go, okay, well, why are you talking about 10, 15, 20 years ago when you were a former student athlete? Like, no one cares anymore, right? But the people who were former student athletes will. So that's my take on it. I think what you're doing is awesome, and it's a community that needs the ability to have someone bring it together for them, right? To create the platform, the synergy, and then let the people do the work otherwise.
Talk about your experience with the transition. Transition from being a former student athlete to then having that discovery process in your early 20s to figure out, what do you want to do for a living?
I think my transition was unique because I almost had two of them. And I say that because when I was a sophomore, I tore my rotator cuff. I was a pitcher, which is probably the worst thing you could possibly do. And I went to the doctor. He basically said, look, you can either hang up the cleats or figure out how to throw submarine sidearm and hope it doesn't hurt. And the surgery is not going to help you. If we do surgery, it's probably just going to end your career. So, decide what you want to do. And I remember sitting there on the steps with my coach at the time, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And it was that moment in which you thought your career was coming to an end, right? And had a bunch of support from friends and colleagues, and I figured out how to throw submarine. It took me 15 months. I rehabbed my shoulder. I went to a summer collegiate league, pitched there in the summer before I graduated early, and went to grad school and did the grad transfer thing. So then I go to Ohio University. I'm at grad school. I'm playing. I go from D3 to D1, totally different world. I'm also trying to throw differently than I ever have. And you're trying to fit into a new group, all that good stuff. And then I had to transition out of there because I got to a point where I walked into a situation, there was 24 pitchers going into the fall. And it was one of those decisions you had to make once you got to the end of the fall of like, okay, I'm probably not going to get very much playing time, if at all. Do I really want to put myself through this? I'm in grad school. The coach really liked me, so I had an opportunity to coach instead, which is the route I took. But I transitioned then, right? So I almost had two transitions of like, do I hang up the cleats? And then what do I do? And then I get to grad school and I do the same thing. And then you also ask yourself the question like, well, what do I want to do? And at the time it was go be a GM and, on the player side of baseball, because that's all I knew. And I love the sport, but when you really, really do some deep self-work and you dig into the identity component, that is what all I knew. I was playing every single day since I was, 13 years old. Like, what else would I know? And as I started to try and peel myself away from it, after I went into the player side, started with the Mariners, worked for MLB with the Arizona Fall League, I said, you know what? I'm going to get into college athletics. I'm going to go back to where it all started, worked on the sponsorship side there, got into the business side. And as you go through that transition, what's unique about it is you have to find yourself again. And you have to create yourself again, right? So you created yourself as a student athlete, then you have to create yourself again as a professional and figure out what it is you're going to create. It's not going to find you, right? You have to go out and do the work. And so it takes a lot of question asking to others and to yourself, and to really understand, like, what do you enjoy, right? And not everyone can put the job and the passion all together, right? It's unique. But my transition was tough. I mean, I remember being depressed. I remember, figuring out like, why am I working out anymore? Right. Like then I went on a whole health kick and, you figure out how to work out differently and you're like, wait, why don't I just do this for fun? And, there's all different things that go into it. But it's not easy. And I would tell you, Rob, like I've picked up pickleball over the last year and a half. That has brought the fire back into, learning something new, training, the skills, all of that. And what's fascinating about it is it's like, if I would have found that 10 years ago, my transition might have been a lot different, right? So it's finding that thing that has that competitive side still for you from a daily perspective or weekly perspective and things that you're doing, and then creating a community, right? So within the pickleball community, like that's a group of people, right, that I can relate to, I spend time with, it's consistent, all of that. So you find it just in different ways, and it might not be right away. You have to understand that it might be 10 years later, but figuring out what you do and don't like along the process is a huge part of it.
What kind of advice would you give to somebody who needs to go through that transition period, but it's really that self-evaluation of like, oh my gosh, what am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? And is ticket sales, sponsorship sales, working in the sports industry, the thing that's going to get me the most, financially growth? Is it going to give me personal growth? Do I have this servant's mentality where I want to service people? What was that for you? How did you go through that part of it when you kind of did your self-evaluation?
I think part of it's just go experience life, right? Like figure out the journey, figure out the process. You're gonna find things that you do and don't like to do. I put myself in uncomfortable situations by moving to places that I didn't know anybody, to experience different parts of the country, different cultures, different ways of life. But I think the biggest thing in terms of self-evaluation is you have to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations or places where, like, I was in Indiana and it started snowing and I'm like, I'm an outdoor person. What am I doing? Like, what do I like to do? Right. And I'm like, I like to golf. I like to hike. I'm like, I can't do any of this here. So you make a change. Right. And I think it's that self-evaluation of, it could be home, it could be somewhere else in the world, but like, what do you want to do, and what do you enjoy, right? Like, and if you don't know, that's okay. First step is acceptance, right? Accept the fact that you don't know what you enjoy. That's okay. And then start to ask other people, like, hey, like, what do you do for fun? Like, what do you enjoy? Why do you enjoy it? Right? Because then it might give you some thoughts of like, oh, I enjoy this, or, I like to be competitive, so never really thought of that. Or it could be writing, reading, whatever the case is. And I think it's just coming to the acceptance of like, it's okay to not know. And you have to know that there's going to be a process in order to find that.
Right. You discover in your 20s, you kind of zone in on your 30s, and you make the most money as you can in your 40s. Invest in real estate, right? All those things that you hear, they're all so true.
Rob, I think one interesting perspective, if you want to put it into like the former student athlete lens, is think about let's just use 4 years as an easy example, right? You go through your freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. Freshman year of life is that first 10 years out of college. Sophomore year is that next 10 years, junior, next 10 years, senior, next 10 years. If you go to grad school, you're still working, right? Probably 60 plus. Those increments of like, oh, how did I grow when I was a freshman in college? And then how did I grow when I was a sophomore in college? And you use those same experiences to rely on. Then like, how do you want to grow in the first 10 years? And then how do you want to grow in the next 10 years, right? And think of it in those chunks and those blocks. Obviously, it's a little bit of an extreme, 10 years versus one, right? But like, concepts there.
It's very, very true. You start building. By the time you get to your senior year, you're done. So yeah, by your 40s and 50s, I'm good. I raised my kids. We're getting ready to retire. Yeah, those grad years are definitely your 60s.
And some might have burnout from work just the same way they did with competing, right? Like there's plenty of student athletes who by the time they get to their senior year, they're burnt out. They're done with the training. They're done with the practice. They're done with the traveling, like whatever it is, they're done. And that's okay, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, sir, thank you for your time. I certainly appreciate it. And like I always say, you're going to discover what you don't want to do in life way before you figure out something that you do love to do, and it's sort of kind of that magical bullet sometimes when you're kind of looking at your career. And I know man, it seems like, and you're so young, but it seems like you've done a million things with publishing and authoring a couple books and traveling all over the place, and you continue to do so, and inspiring other people, especially college kids. So keep it up.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. My one last thought would just be, go experience things, right? You never know what you can learn. You never know who you'll meet, and you never know where it leads to, right? And so I think just go experience it, enjoy the journey, embrace it, be patient, which is not an easy thing to do. You'll find success.
That's Jake. This is Rob. You're watching 5% Club Stories. See you again.